Hello, my name is Julie, and today I'm going to be talking about the 23 books I've read in the last 2 months. Okay, so I did actually film my June wrap-up, but I lost my intro, and all I've got is me talking about the books. So I thought I would just combine the 2 months like I did last time and just make it easier on myself. So notably, June and July have both set some records for the year so far. June had my most read of the year, while July has had my highest quality of the year. So in June, I ended up reading 13 books, which counted up to 4,934 pages. Evens out to 379.5 pages per book, 159 pages per day. While in July, I read 10 books with 3,735 pages read, averaging out to 373.5 pages per book and 120.5 pages per day. Average star rating for June was 3.46, and for July, it was 3.9, which I think is the highest average of any month that I've tracked monthly stats, so that's pretty cool. So of all these books, I read 2 2 stars, 7 3 stars, 11 4 stars, and 3 5 stars. For the mediums I read 5 physical books, 6 library books, 10 audiobooks, 1 e-arc, and 1 ebook. 15 of these authors were new to me, and 8 of them were not new to me. 6 of the authors were male, 13 are female, and 4 of them are non-binary. When it comes to being in a series, 11 of the books I read were standalones, 10 of them were first books in series, and then I read 1 sequel and 1 finale. In demographics, I read 7 YA books and 16 adult. And then genre, which is always just a ton of different things, it continued to be so. Read 9 fantasy, 4 speculative, 2 sci-fi, 2 horror, 2 literary fictions, 2 historical fictions, 1 romance, and 1 nonfiction. Now let's go to Past Julie, who's going to talk about my June reads. For Dark Shores, I had Katie blindly pick that with a little choose your own adventure thing that I did. This is... I just got a message from my date. Anyway, that date may or may not be my boyfriend now. Hi, Austin. This is about a world in which there are 2 continents that don't know that the other exists. One of them is less industrialized and is more like tribal, and the other one is Roman inspired. And there are these seafaring people called the Marin who are the only people who know that both continents exist, and their whole thing, they will never tell anybody that the other continent exists because they don't want, giant war to happen. And our main character is a Marin, and when her best friend, who is not Marin, is about to be put in an arranged marriage that she doesn't want to be in, she tells her the secret, it accidentally gets out, and now the Roman people are going to try to conquer this other continent. Our other main character is one of the Roman generals that is being sent to conquer these people, but he doesn't actually want to do that, and he is sort of undermining the authority of this colonial power. This is a YA fantasy romance, so you can kind of see where it's going to go, but I think that Danielle L. Jensen has that balance that I really like between a fantasy plot and a romance plot, and also makes them intertwine in interesting ways. Male love interest Marcus really reminds me of Akiva from Daughter of Smoke and Bone, not in looks, just in vibes. I don't know, I really like him. And Tariana, who was our female lead, I just really loved her. She just wants to do what's right for everybody, and she wants to protect her people. We also have this larger conflict where it doesn't seem like there's necessarily a right way to go about anything, and they're trying to stop the colonizers in the best way possible without getting themselves slaughtered. I'm not sure that I love their solution to how to best stop these colonizers, because it doesn't feel super correct, but I'm not sure that that's actually where the series is going to go, so I'm not sure that I can actually critique that for this book. But I think white authors should be really careful about what they do when they're trying to have a fantasy setting that has to do with colonialism. I thought the Roman aspect of it was done really well. As someone who has studied ancient Rome and Latin, it was just Roman inspired, but it really gave me the right vibes, and I think she did a good job with that. I never ever say this about authors, but like, Danielle L. Jensen has amazing settings. Like, she just always comes up with really solid settings that put you in the place that the characters are in. I'm happy with this, and I'm glad that I can continue on in this series and have some Danielle L. Jensen with me while I am waiting for more Bridge Kingdom to come out, because it's my obsession. So I ended up rating this 4 stars, and I am planning on continuing in the series. Next up, I read City of Stairs by Robert Jackson Bennett. He is the author of the Foundry Side trilogy. I read this for the Friendathon prompt to read a book by an author that they are anticipating a release for, so we are both waiting to read the finale to Foundry Side. So this is about a world in which there used to be gods walking around in this world, and it was very prevalent in the world, the magic of these different gods in these different regions, and the culture that worshiped these gods had taken over a different country, and then one of those subjugated people rose up and actually killed the gods, and so that country that was colonized then colonized the colonizers, so now they're in power. They have banned any reference to these gods, even though they left physical markings on the land. It's not just that they're not allowed to practice their religion, they're not allowed to acknowledge that the religion exists in the first place. But our main character has been sent undercover to investigate a murder of one of her friends who was researching a ton about the gods, and he seemed to have thought before he died that something was up and that something was about to happen. And so our main character is going about and trying to figure out what's going on with the gods and continue her friend's research. This author's books have what I call written by a man syndrome, in which they are so wrapped up in their ideas, which are cool, but they don't actually make characters that we care about. They're not fully fleshed out, we don't really connect with them on a deep level. There's kind of a distance between the characters and the reader. And that's kind of what happened in this book. I feel like I got lost in the sauce and I was just trying to read it as quickly as possible and get it over with, because I wanted to know more about our world, but I knew that I wasn't going to fall in love with these characters. I really liked the commentary about censorship and stuff like that, and I think any sort of concept where there are gods among people is a really cool one to follow. Overall, I thought this was just okay. I didn't like it as much as Foundry Side, and I probably won't think about it ever again, and I don't really plan on continuing in the series, just because I know, even though I would get more answers about this world, that investment is just not going to be there. So I gave this a 3 star. It was okay, but not for me. And the last book that I read for Friendathon was Atonement by Ian McEwan. I read this for the prompt to read a book that has similarities to their favorite movie. Katie's favorite movie, as it should be, is The Imitation Game, which is about World War II. It's about the Enigma, and also stars Keira Knightley. So I decided to read Atonement, which is also about World War II and stars Keira Knightley. I'm so smart. So this book, half of it takes place over the course of an afternoon, and then there is a time jump to World War II. So this takes place in the 30s, I believe, where our main character is about 12, and she really wants to be a writer, and it's her going about her day, seeing things through the view of being a young person, and going through the day that she attributes with being the end of her childhood, as she sees something that she doesn't understand, and that leads her to falsely accuse someone of a crime that occurs in 10 years or so later, when all of these characters are still dealing with the ramifications of that, and also going through World War II. I know I always talk about how my big pet peeve is those time jumps, but I knew this one was coming, so it wasn't a big deal. That's how the book is pitched. But I didn't connect with this book, and it felt like a drag. I could have been told that this book was written at the time of World War II, and I would have believed you just based on like how antiquated the language felt. It didn't feel like this book is as old as I am. It felt like this book is 4 times my age. I got along with it enough that I think that I would really love the movie, because everyone does, but it was such a slog to physically get through. I didn't really connect with the writing style, and the plot of it was different enough than I anticipated it was going to be, that I wasn't as hooked as I would have been had I known a lot about the book going in. I don't know. First of all, I thought Keira Knightley's character was the main character. She's not, and I thought it was going to much more follow her story. I did actually really like the epilogue chapter. That was really well done. I loved that. While I did get what the author was doing with the main character, it was just like such a bad reading experience. All I wanted to do was read, but every time I picked up this book, I got bored. I ended up giving this a 2-star. I get it. It's not a bad book. I just didn't care. And the other books that I read this month. So first we have Death on Our Hands by Atonement. This is a literary fiction that is a little surrealist. It's got an unreliable narrator, as our main character is a woman in her 70s or 80s who believes that a crime has been committed. She finds a note that says, "Here is this dead girl's body. I didn't kill her." And there's no body. So she's just going through, well, what could this person be like? Who is this person who left this note, and who is this girl who's supposed to have died? She's going through her day, but she is constructing this narrative in her head of what must be happening, even though there is absolutely zero evidence that this crime was committed except for this little note. We're in this unreliable thing where she keeps picking up little clues and things that you don't actually know if they're there or not, if these are actually in real life, or if it's just happening in her head and this is what she's imagining that this crime would be like. So in that sense, it was interesting. It's not a murder mystery, it's a woman sort of devolving, which I think is cool. I liked this better than I liked My Year of Rest and Relaxation. I do think that Atonement isn't gonna be for me because she's one of those authors that has like a non-plot. It doesn't go as far as I think this story could have. I think it could have laid in heavier. I liked the writing style as far as it went. I just thought the concept for this was really interesting. I liked it, but I didn't love it, and because of that, I don't think I'm going to be picking up more from this author in the future. So I ended up giving this about a 3.5. I don't know, like, I get the obsession with this book. It just wasn't for me. Like, I need something more like Bunny. This is a book that I would say is in the same wheelhouse of a character who's not entirely sure what's going on as Bunny, but the thing is with Bunny, like, there are things that happen. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. Then I read The Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick. I would like to note that M.A. Carrick is actually 2 people, and one of the authors is non-binary. This is about our main character, Ren. She used to be a finger in one of the city's like crime gangs as a kid, but now she has moved on from that, and with her friend, she has decided that she is going to get into this noble house and pretend to be a relative of theirs and swindle them into like accepting her into their family so she can have money. This city that we're in is based on Venice in that it has trading house families and there's a lot of rivers and masks. I thought this audiobook was pretty good. I thought the performance was well done. The narrator was doing a ton of different accents. Unfortunately, our main character has a heavy Russian accent. It was a well done accent by the performer, but I wish the authors hadn't written that, if that makes sense. This is such a long audiobook. It went on forever. I didn't super care for the fantasy, and like I just found myself zoning out while I was listening to this, and then I didn't care enough to go back and figure out what had happened, and I was just trying to get through it. Could I tell you about any of these characters? Not really. I guess the setting was kind of cool. Like, I don't remember a whole lot about this book because I didn't absorb a lot of it in the first place, so I gave this a 2-star. Then I read the Three of Clubs book club pick for June. Our first hand, our theme was Dark Academia, and the third book is Player's Choice, and the group voted to read The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. This is a fantasy dark academia. We are set in our world, but about 1% of the population has magic powers, and that has been integrated into society. Like, there are colleges to do magic and such. Basically, every 10 years, there is a secret society called the Alexandrian Society, which is the reincarnation of the Library of Alexandria, and they reach out to the 6 best magicians of their age and invite them to compete, to be in the society, to have all the knowledge that they want, and they know that only 5 of them will actually get in. Look, this book is such a cool idea, and I think our characters are cool. The thing is, this does a lot of telling instead of showing. We have characters thinking about other characters' actions in the past instead of actually going through and seeing those scenes play out. We are told about things. Very few things actually happen on the page. And it's really, really frustrating because I feel like this could have been a 5-star obsession for me, and we really don't get enough of the world building of this really cool magic world because it's so just about the characters. I knew going into this that the pull for this was the characters, but I didn't think that that would be the only thing going for it. We've got a really cool build up to the next book that has some cool implications for what's going to happen next. And it would have absolutely blown me away if we had had more build up to begin with. I think the sequel is going to be an improvement on this, not least because the author is now traditionally published, so there might be more editing. But I did enjoy this, but it really let me down how the story was told. Even though the diction, like the writing, the vocabulary itself that the author uses is really pretty, and I think she has a pretty writing style, but it is how the narrative was actually told was just not it. So I know I've only complained about this book, but I gave this a 4-star. Like, I thought it was good. Do I think it's overhyped? Yes, but it's still good, and I think this author has a ton of potential. Then I listened to The Stars and the Blackness Between Them by Winona Petrus. This is a YA contemporary with a little bit of magical realism in it, and is about our 2 main characters who are both queer Black girls. One of them lives in America and just had a strange encounter with one of her girlfriends over the summer, and it's making her start to question things about herself. But she is also starting to feel physically strange, and she's tired all the time and doesn't know what's wrong with her. And our other main character is from the Caribbean, and she was caught with another girl, and her extremely religious mother has sent her to live with her father in the States as a sort of, abandoning her. These girls met when they were children because their fathers are friends, but now that they're meeting again, they are immediately connected to each other, and they form a really strong bond over their shared identities and their experiences of the world and their shared spirituality. And it is so sweet, these girls supporting each other. Another main plot point of this book is one of them finds this memoir by a Black man who's currently on death row, and our main characters really connect with the things that he has to say, and that makes them think differently about the way that they've been living and the way that they approach their own lives. I like that one of our main characters knows what her sexuality is, and the other one is just figuring it out, because that was a kind of nice contrast. The things that I really want to talk about with this book are technically spoilers, so I don't want to say much more about this one. I thought the audiobook was really well performed. One of the performers is the author, which is always something that I look for and something that I want to tell other people about. So if you can understand the accents, absolutely listen to the audiobook. This ending, what do I do about this ending? I don't know. So I gave this a very strong 4-star, maybe 4.25. Really enjoyed it. Such a wonderful listen that I got through in 2 sittings at work. Then also at work, I listened to In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This is a memoir, which I had never really read memoirs that much before this year, but now it's my 3rd. This is a memoir that is told in tableaus that explain what happened in her previous abusive marriage, which isn't particularly talked about because it was queer. This is so beautifully written. It is something that I really want to listen to this again, maybe get a physical copy and sit with the words so I can read things over again if I want to, maybe annotate it, because I thought that this had so many important conversations about abusive relationships and how that can affect a person. And as well as telling her own story, the author goes through some history of queer women and relationships and abusive relationships, and how a lot of queer identity has been erased, and how abuse in the queer community isn't always tackled head on, and that's for several reasons. One of the main conversations that she has is talking about how whenever a queer person does something wrong, it is attributed to their queerness and not them just being a person. That a person can do something evil is something that people can understand, but if you are a minority, it is attributed to your minority. But we flicker through our author's life before, during, and then some after this marriage, and how deeply impacted she was by the romantic relationships that she had. The feeling of smallness, of not being able to say no, of not having control over your own life was something that really resonated with me. So this is definitely a nonfiction that I am going to be highly recommending to everyone who is interested in it, because I got a lot out of this book, and the writing style just really captured the feeling of what this author is going through. So I normally say, you know, I don't rate nonfiction, but oh boy, this was an easy 5-star. Then I read All Systems Red by Martha Wells. This is a sci-fi novella that is the first in the Murderbot series. This is about our main character who is a robot, and this robot calls itself Murderbot because it doesn't think that it has feelings, or it doesn't want to be involved in humans, and is sort of autistically coded in not being able to connect with other people. Something happens to the crew that she is a part of, and while they are trying to save their own skins, Murderbot is going with them and trying to, you know, figure out what's wrong, while also the people are trying to get Murderbot to be part of the crew and trying to show Murderbot that they're loved. I was under the impression from what other people were saying that this was going to be like laugh out loud, hilarious, and that Murderbot genuinely like doesn't like these people and just wants to go back to their TV shows. But really it's just is this autistically coded character who's honestly really sweet, and it is people accepting Murderbot. And it was just kind of cute. I wasn't super paying attention or following the plot, the actual mystery of what's going on and the corporations that are overlording over everyone. I was more paying attention to the characters themselves. I liked Murderbot, and I liked that it was a little happier than I thought it was going to be. So I gave this a 3.5 or 4-star. I liked it. I wish it was longer, and I am interested in continuing on in this series, particularly whenever it gets to novel length. Next up, I read She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. This is a story that takes place in 1300s China when the Mongol rule is going on, and our main character is a girl who is destined for nothingness while her brother is really lazy, but he's dedicated for greatness. So our main character, after he dies, ends up assuming his identity and goes to become a monk where he was promised a spot, and through just sheer determination and will, she fucking does it. She just is like, well, I'm great, so I get to do whatever. It's not a main character who is wanting to do things for the greater good. It is a character who wants to be on top because she wants to be, which I love. This book is very gay. Our main character has some sort of trans identity where she has shirked her femininity because she is dressing as a man and living as a man, but she doesn't fully identify with being a man or a woman. She's not just a woman in disguise, and she's not straight up a trans man. That sort of in-between place is something that the main character does think about, but it's not something that I guess needs a modern title. This was really political, which I wasn't expecting. I also didn't know that this is narrated almost half from another perspective, where we have this eunuch general who, because he is a eunuch, is sort of also in this in-between place of not really being a man and not being a woman either. So this is low-key just our main character kicking ass, like more politically than physically kicking ass. She's a monk, so she's more of a leader than anything. She's not the one who's doing the ass kicking, but she is so fucking insane. And I am in love with her girlfriend. Oh my god, I love her. I love her so much. She's the only one who's got a conscience in this book. I am low-key upset that this is just gonna be a duology because I think that this is just gonna be super cool going through. It was just cool to follow a character who just wants what she wants because she wants it. So I gave this a 4-star, 4.5. I don't know. I loved it. It was great. Then I read When the Moon Was Ours by Anna Marie McLemore. This is YA magical realism about two teenagers who have been best friends ever since they were kids, and they start having a budding romantic relationship. But other things are getting in the way, making it complicated. Samir helped the other character, Meal, feel welcome when she was just dropped into this town under magical circumstances. And Meal is also keeping one of Sam's secrets. And Meal grows flowers out of her wrist. It just go into it. It's a queer YA coming of age. That's it. I don't know how to pitch this book. This was so cool. I'm definitely going to be reading more from this author. I knew that I was really gonna love it. I think my only complaint is that sometimes this book got like over dramatic. Like there'd be a character who would say something and then the other person would entirely just go overboard in their reaction about it, and then it was like, come the fuck on. But it was just really sweet for the most part, with these two characters just really love each other and are trying to do the best for each other, and their families are trying to do what's best for them. The writing style was really reminiscent of the Raven Boys. There was just a lot of symbolic language that was used and comparative language, and I really just really loved it. So I gave this 4.5 stars. It was really, really sweet, and I can't wait to read more from this author. Then I listened to Felix Ever After by Case and Calendar. This is about our main character, Felix, who is a trans boy, and he's an art student, and he ends up getting outed as trans, and he believes that it is his best friend's ex who's done it. So he ends up making an anonymous profile to try to get secrets out of this guy and essentially, you know, do the same thing that he thinks this person did to him. And they end up actually connecting in a way that they didn't think was possible, since they know each other in real life. Meanwhile, it's also Felix trying to figure out if being a trans boy is truly his identity or if there might be something more to it. And it's just going through and trying to figure out who Felix is. I thought that these were pretty realistic depictions of teenagers, with the exception of like the catfishing plot. We have a love triangle go on, which I think was well done and ended in a realistic way, and it was just sweet. I listened to this very quickly and I really enjoyed it. I do think this deserves a lot of the hype that it was getting. So I ended up giving this a 4-star. And the last book that I read in this month was Knight's Shadow by Sebastian de Castell. This is the second book in the Greatcoat series. So this is like Three Musketeers inspired, where we have this order of knights that were upholding the king's justice that happened hundreds of years ago. Then the most recent king reinstates them, and then when he's murdered and the monarchy is overthrown, they are scattered to the winds and like shamed. So our main characters are three of those greatcoats, and we are following them as they are trying to still uphold the king's law. I really love the narrator for this book, and I low-key just want to listen to all of the voices that he does. He reminds me of a dungeon master. He just really encapsulates all these different voices and has a really fun time. This one kind of lost me. I like just didn't really care. One of our main characters who I love like wasn't even in the book, which bugged me. I can't find a summary of the first book. So while listening to a review, they went over a scene that I didn't remember at all that was really not okay and I don't agree with, and I think that the reviewer was entirely right, and like a woman's assault is kind of used as a plot point. It kind of does leave a bad taste in my mouth, and there's also an assault that happens that is then like justified as love in the first book, and I'm like, I don't like that. I listened to this like 20-hour audiobook in 2 days because I was desperately trying to fit it into June, and think a lot of the humor was spot on in this book. I really liked our three main characters, but overall I didn't enjoy this as much as the first one. I thought it was okay. I gave it a 3-star. And now I'm going to talk about the books that I read in July, which, as I mentioned before, highest quality of the year. The first book that I read was Written in the Stars by Alexandria Bellfleur. This is a rom-com. One of our main characters is very type B, and she runs one of the most popular horoscope Twitter social media pages and has like a horoscope reading service with her best friend. She has tried dating so much that she is about to give up, but she's always more invested than anybody else she goes out with. So she's giving it one last try. Her new business partner is setting her up with his sister, and that sister ends up being really stuck up, doesn't have time for love, doesn't want to be set up on these dates that her brother keeps setting her up on, just wants to focus on her job and doesn't want to get her heart broken again. And this was just super sweet. I think it was interesting that we had one of our main characters is really spiritual and into horoscopes and stuff, and the other character is not into that at all, but entirely respects it and like sees that as something that they like about the other character. Like, that was super sweet. I think the spice in here was very good. I really liked it. I enjoyed the discussions around their separate lives, of interacting with their families and thinking about their past relationships. I thought the individual discussions of character were good, as well as their chemistry together. Some of the dialogue was iffy. This is one of those books that really talks about like pop culture all the time, and I'm like, that's something that usually I'm not really into. And I also think this had one of those rom-com like immediate wrap-ups where it just kind of abruptly ends. I think there could have been a little bit more meat to the ending. But overall, I had a good time, so I ended up giving this a 3.5 star, and I am definitely going to be picking up the other 2 books in this series. Next, I read the July book for my book club, 3 of Clubs. This quarter, our theme is time travel, which is my favorite trope of all time, and we are reading The Last Magician by Lisa Maxwell. This is the first in a YA fantasy quartet, I believe. This is about a world where magic has kind of slowly died out, but there is this barrier that's around New York City, so anybody who has magic powers who is in New York City can't leave without having their magic essentially violently ripped away from them. And the more powerful you are, the less likely you are to survive that. And there are societies in New York that are trying to cull out the magical people. And our main character is magical and is in this group of magical people, and they are trying to fight those forces and take down the barrier so that they will be free to live their own lives. Our main character, Esta, has the power to slow the flow of time. She gets sent on a mission to go back in time with this magical artifact so that she can do this long con heist to get this item that they think will be able to tell them how to knock down that barrier. And so she goes back into the 1920s and she meets this guy there who is also magic, but is posing as a stage magician. I thought that the magic of this was super cool. I really enjoyed the sort of heisty, schemy, underground crime type people were following. That did feel a little Six of Crows to me, just in the sense of like, we're getting a gang together. It wasn't found family in that sense. There is definitely less trust involved, but I still thought that was super interesting. I think the writing of this was really cinematic. Like, I think that this would make a really good movie, and that's my number one reason for considering continuing in this series. I think the main thing that I was kind of iffy on in this was that I wasn't as connected to the characters as I wish I was. Essentially, our main character does her first time travel, and she finds out that accidentally one of her friends doesn't exist anymore, and she's really heartbroken by that. But the thing is, we never met this character, so there's no emotional impact for us. And I think there were a couple of decisions throughout this that kind of did the same thing, where they could have had more stakes, but there weren't. My favorite character was definitely Hart. That's the magician posing as a stage magician. He's really noble, he's a sweetie, and he really likes our main character. I liked this book, but not as much as I thought I was going to. This, again, I'm rating around a 3.5 star, but I would definitely be interested in picking up different series by the same author to see if I get more emotionally connected to those characters and if that is improved. Next up, I listened to No Gods, No Monsters by Cadwell Turnbull. This is about a world in which very suddenly it becomes apparent that monsters are real, like werewolves and shapeshifters and that sort of thing. It comes to light through this found footage of a police body cam of a policeman shooting an unarmed black man. The footage of that black man turning into a werewolf is then completely scrubbed from the internet. So the entire world is sort of becoming aware that monsters have always lived among us, but some people are choosing not to believe it. Some of our main characters are monsters and they are trying to fight for their own rights. So this is a very allegorical book. This book kind of gives me Toni Morrison vibes in the way that we have a lot of different pieces interacting and we kind of go from one thing to another very fluidly, and it takes a minute to understand what's going on where. I listened to the audiobook for this and it is extremely well performed. The downside of that is it was harder to understand because there's a good amount of switching around between perspectives and what's going on. I'm not sure that for my own comprehension, listening to the audiobook was the best way to go. This is sort of fantasy, literary fiction, allegorical. It's a little bit horror. There's definitely, like, the greatest scene in this book by far is awesome in the traditional sense of the word awesome, like being struck with awe in like a horrific way. This reminded me of the Broken Earth trilogy, and I think that it is going to get the same sort of awards that did, and I think it absolutely deserves it. I chose to not rate this book because I don't feel like I grasped everything as well as I could have. So might just have to listen to this one again so I can get everything and put my thoughts together and then give a proper rating. Next up, thanks to the great people at NetGalley and Tor, I was given an e-arc for What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. So this is sort of an expansion slash reinterpretation of the Edgar Allan Poe story, The Fall of the House of Usher. This story and The Fall of the House of Usher are about our main character, who is called Alex Easton in this story, called upon by a former friend. My sister, your old friend, is dying. Will you please come by and kind of say goodbye or try to help be there for her in this troubling time? As our main character is there, things start getting really weird and the interaction between the two siblings is freaky. And when I was reading this Edgar Allan Poe story, I was definitely left like wanting more from it because it's such a popular name when you hear Edgar Allan Poe's titles, and that is exactly how T. Kingfisher felt as well, that there should be more to this, that there should be an expansion upon it, and I think that this was such a good answer to that story. Even though this is a novella, this felt so complete. Kingfisher really delves into a lot of the imagery that Poe shows, where there's a lot of rot and dilapidation. We see a lot of mushrooms and fungus that is just eating over everything, and we get to see more of the dying sister. The whole reason the story starts is that she's dying, but in the original story we don't see much from her at all, and in this we get to see her, we get to talk to her. One of the unexpected things about this book that was also really original is that our main characters are all from this fictional country where they have a gender specific to people who are soldiers, and people, once they leave the military, can decide that that's how they're going to identify for the rest of their lives. So our main character identifies that way, uses neopronouns, and I think it was really interesting to have a non-binary identity from another culture that is respected put into 1800s England and have people sort of interact with that. And I wasn't expecting the humor in this. There definitely was some really funny stuff in here, and I'm learning that humor and horror do kind of go hand in hand. It felt like a very well-rounded story for being so short, and I thought that the explanations of the horrific elements, it felt very true and matched up with the tone of the entire story. I think having that answer was something that the story really needed. This exceeded my expectations that I had of A, a novella, and B, a retelling of a story that I only kind of felt good about and not great. So I ended up giving this a 4.25 star, and I am really excited to read a full-length novel from T. Kingfisher sometime later this year. Next up, I finally read Normal People by Sally Rooney. This is about our main characters, Marianne and Connell, and their relationship as it evolves from high school and into college, and how they see the world differently because of the way that they had grown up and the miscommunications that they have between each other, and how they care for each other so much, but they have just a really toxic, uber-dependent relationship. It's very infamous that Sally Rooney's books don't have quotation marks in them, and I thought that that would really bother me, but I immediately forgot about it and just was in this story. Connell and Marianne are very well realized characters, and the way that this is told sort of feels like people recalling their own memories, especially when we see Connell and Marianne recall the same situation differently, reading into each other's tones and misunderstanding the other person's intentions. This fraught relationship is the core of the novel, and it was done extremely well. Something I also really liked is that sometimes we have an event that is referenced as a past event before we actually see it happen, which I thought was really interesting. I think this is just an accomplishment in the sense of how realistic this felt. This did very much feel like Marianne and Connell were very real people in a very real relationship and having real struggles. I don't think I can say anything that hasn't already been said about this book, but I am in the crowd that I think this definitely deserves the hype it's been getting, and I can't wait to have the entire Sally Rooney backlog in my TBR now. So upon finishing it, I gave it a 4.5 star, but if I want to be more realistic, I think this is probably more of a 5. Then I listened to Redemptor by Jordan Ofueko. This is the sequel and conclusion to Raybearer. This is a YA fantasy that's based in West Africa. This empire that is ruled by an emperor who then elects a council of 13 brothers and sisters that can then mind speak, and their entire magical relationship is based upon having complete and total trust and love for each other. And our main character is sent as a child to infiltrate this future emperor's circle and then kill him, Ella Enchanted style, and that she magically doesn't have any say and will be taken over and will have to kill him. So I had heard a lot of people feel iffy about this sequel, but I thought it was just as good as the original. I think that it was a lot more insular in that we don't see as much from Tarisai's siblings, and that's sort of done purposely because Tarisai in this book starts to shut out her siblings and just focus on herself in a really unhealthy way. She is having problems with anxiety and extreme guilt. The politics were interesting of this, of Tarisai trying to talk to other heads of state, trying to get them on her side to trust her. I think Tarisai is a really great character, and I'm really glad that she is being introduced to YA audiences because she is that person in power, but we don't stop with her being in power. Then she then has to learn how to lead, and she also has to learn that she needs help and can't do things by herself because that won't end well. I also thought that this was wrapped up really well. Sometimes you'll get that jump into the future where everybody's married and coupled off or something like that. And this had a very realistic next step, and we see that there is opportunity for our main characters to make change in the future. So overall, I give this a 4-star, which is the same thing that I gave the first book. Next up, I listened to The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. This is one of the books for my Goodreads Lens challenge, in which I am reading all of the books that I put on my Goodreads TBR that I still had not read or deleted since before 2018. If you want to see those books that I need to read, it is down below. I have 2 months left to read in any of those books before I have to get them off of my TBR. This is a World War II novel about 2 sisters living in France when World War II is about to hit. They have grown up apart and don't know each other very well, don't have a great relationship, and they are each rebelling against Nazi occupation in their own ways. Vianne is older and has a daughter, and her husband has just gone off to war. Isabel, the younger, goes to Paris and decides that she is going to be an active part of the rebellion, deliver information throughout spy networks. This is a very, very hyped book. It's been on like the most read book of the year lists for years since it came out, and I thought it was really good. It does give me the same all the light we cannot see type vibes, where we have 2 different perspectives of the war flipping back and forth. I thought the pacing was good. I thought we saw just enough of either side. I was equally engaged in either story. Isabel is, in particular, based on a specific historical figure, while Vianne is more based on general accounts of women in France. I thought this was emotional and generally pretty realistic, and the ending really got to my heartstrings. So I gave this a 4-star. This definitely would be a historical fiction recommendation, going to be something that I recommend to my mom in the future, but I definitely got what I wanted and expected out of a World War II story. Then I read Project Hail Mary. This is a book that I don't think you should go in knowing anything about it, except it is a sci-fi by Andy Weir, and it is a little bit higher sci-fi than The Martian is. This is a little bit more advanced technology. Our main character essentially wakes up with no memory, does not even remember his name, figures out he's on a spaceship, and is trying to figure out how the spaceship is real, what he's doing there, why he's there, and what he needs to accomplish. Why was he sent out for this? This was such an emotional roller coaster. I think Andy Weir just really hits those survival notes so well, of the low lows of I am gonna die and the high highs of I might be able to make it out of here. But I loved our main character. I loved the scientific discussions. There were some physics things that I thought were kind of spoon fed, but when talking to other people, I think it's just me being an engineer and having more knowledge of physics than maybe the average person does. It was just really cathartic, and I thought it was paced really well. We go back and forth as he's figuring out more of his memories. We see the memories that he is remembering, so he is experiencing the story as we are. And I think that was really effective, although as the story went on, I thought that they were just less effective, but that would be mostly my only note. I think most anything else I would say would be sort of in spoiler territory, so all I want to say is Rocky. 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 So I gave this a 5 star. I nearly teared up at one point during this book at a really emotionally tense point, and it was just a really cathartic read that I needed. Then I read Foe by Ian Reid. I'm Thinking of Ending Things was my favorite book that I read in 2021, so I immediately wanted to pick up his next book. This is about Junior, our main character, who lives on a farm with his wife. It's a little near future. They're very isolated. They don't really have a lot of contact with other people. And one day, this guy shows up at their house and says that Junior has been selected for this amazing opportunity that they had no idea even existed. Junior did not sign up for this. And Junior also doesn't have a choice. But it turns out that his wife will not be left alone when he is doing this experience. This follows our main character as we are leading up to him leaving, and this guy is really invading his privacy and his wife's privacy. It definitely gives some of the same dissociative vibes of I'm Thinking of Ending Things. However, this was not a 5 star for me. This, while it still had that same dissociative type feeling, I think a lot of the questions that came into play about this had to do with things that weren't mundane, versus I'm Thinking of Ending Things. It is a couple on a car ride, meeting the parents for the first time. It is mundane, what is physically going on, versus this, I think I had more questions about, like, well, this is supposed to be near future, so what's actually going on? What assumptions am I making? That sort of thing. I was let down because I guessed the plot twist pretty quickly in. I think that this is definitely something that I've seen before. The ending and like the fallout after the plot twist made the plot twist better, I think, and I liked a lot of what this book was trying to say about relationships, particularly marriage, but still, I didn't have as much of an attachment or investment in the story as I did the last book. So I ended up giving this another 3.5. Why am I so attached to 3.5? I don't know. And the last book that I read in July was Furyborn by Claire Legrand. This is the first in a YA fantasy series, and it's about this world in which it has been prophesied that throughout the ages there will be 2 queens that will have more power than anybody else. One of these queens will be the Queen of Light, and one of them will be the Queen of Blood. The Queen of Light will bring about peace, and the Queen of Blood will bring destruction, the end of the world, that sort of thing. And we follow 2 girls over 1,000 years apart who are discovering that they might be one of the queens. They don't know which one. Riel is a lady in the king's court. She is in love with her best friend, who is also the crown prince, and when she is saving his life, accidentally shows everybody that she has more than one magical power, meaning that she might be one of these queens, and so a bunch of trials are set up for her, so she has to beat 7 elemental trials to prove herself as the Sun Queen. 1,000 years in the future, Riel and her contemporaries are essentially myths and legends, and people don't think that all the things that they were talking about with magic and angels were real at all. And our main character, Eliana, is a bounty hunter for the Undying Empire, and when her mom gets kidnapped in this series of kidnappings of women and girls disappearing without a trace, literally vanishing from thin air, she has to team up with some people who are rebelling against the Empire, and she starts questioning what she has been doing her entire life. I wasn't expecting like anything from this book. I listened to this because it was available from my library and I'd heard some interesting things about it. Read Claire Legrand before and only felt like meh about her, but like this has some potential. I do want to say, first off, this is YA, but it has some sexually explicit scenes in it, so I do think that if new adult was a category that was well defined, that it should be put in new adult. But the thing is, that's not the world we live in, and otherwise this is a YA story, so I think it is shelved correctly, but I think that that should be like kind of put as a warning. Everything that happens is consensual and between people who are within the YA age range, so it makes sense. I don't know. Something I really love in fantasy is when we explore the truth of myths and legends and history and how there are discrepancies between them. Like in, for example, Mistborn or Priory of the Orange Tree, those are plots that I am really engaged in and I'm always dying to pick up. And this was one of those. There was a good balance in the plot. There wasn't one who was given more attention than the other, but I did emotionally care about Riel's timeline more. I really liked her side characters and her relationships with her best friend and the Crown Prince. I think the elemental trials were really cool. There are creatures that are referred to as angels, and it is so cool and has such amazing potential. Not to mention that this is a book that includes one of my favorite SFF subgenres, and oof, like I want to scream about that to somebody. One of the weaker points I thought of this book is that I didn't think there was a whole lot of contrast between Eliana and Riel as main characters. I know they're supposed to be sort of reflections of one another, and that is deliberate, but I should be able to tell pretty quickly who I'm following. Also, I think that Eliana's story kind of dragged at the beginning, but as we went along and things started picking up, I did become more interested in it. I gave this a really solid 4-star, and I am looking forward to continuing in this series. This is one that I am 100% continuing in. So those are all the books that I read in June. I'm tired, you're tired, none of us want to be here. So I'm gonna wrap this up. If you would like to follow me anywhere, watch any of my videos, join my book club, whatever, link is in the description. If you want to talk about any of these books with me, let me know. Julie, who's posting this video, wants to talk to you about these books. Julie, who is filming this video, doesn't want to anymore. She's done. She's done with this. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.